Hello everyone, and welcome to NeoSystems webinar, the CIO's Guide for Upgrading to Costpoint 7. Quick look at our agenda today. We're going to go through some brief introductions, then get into the hardware and software requirements that are involved with upgrading to Costpoint 7, then take a really detailed look at the architecture and components that you'll need to consider when you're upgrading to Costpoint 7. We're going to go into the new users, security, and roles, as well as take a look at the best practices for testing and scheduling your upgrade to Costpoint 7. And then get into a little more of an analysis discussion and things that the CIO should be considering before they upgrade to Costpoint 7. Then we'll open it up to your questions. As always, if you have a question at any time, write it into the question box and we'll be sure to get to it. At NeoSystems, we're proud to say, grow ahead, we've got your back office. At NeoSystems, we provide strategic back office services, including accounting in Costpoint, HR and IT including hosting Costpoint 7 in our environment. And forming an umbrella over all these services, we have our consulting where we've done implementations. NeoSystems employees have done hundreds of successful Costpoint implementations. Upgrades are in the process or have completed over 50 upgrades to Costpoint 7. With me today, we have Rob Wilson. Rob is the co-founder of NeoSystems and our CTO. He and his team keep our secure private hosting infrastructure running for the 500 companies with their 30,000 employees that depend on us to host Deltek and other systems. Our clients are also running Cognos, TM1, and many other applications. Rob also ensures that we are SSAE 16 compliant, both SOC 1 and SOC 2, PCI DSS compliant, ITAR compliant. I think you're getting the idea. Rob and his team run a tight ship. I'm Brian Giblin. I'm a product manager here at NeoSystems. I talk with clients, non-clients, to develop the products and service offerings that you need to meet your most pressing business challenges. We're here to talk about upgrading to Costpoint 7, and always in the back of everyone's mind as they're planning and scheduling that upgrade is the customer care support lifecycle. As many of you know, Costpoint 6 Service Pack 2 goes into sustaining support at the end of April of this year. So with that, I want to go to a poll question and ask you, get a sense, where are people in their planning process for upgrading to Costpoint 7? Have some of you already completed that upgrade? Maybe you've already started, you're starting now and are well on the way? Or are some of you planning to start in 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months? Or some of you have pushed it out even further? We still have a lot of results coming in, but it's all something to keep in mind with that deadline of April 30th coming up. Okay, close the poll, please, and let's share those results. Wow, a couple of you have already upgraded, and 38% are planning within 1 to 3 months, whereas another group of you, 31%, are looking out more than 6 months from now. Interesting results. With that, I want to turn it over to Rob Wilson, our CTO.
Thank you, Brian. Let's start with a baseline here, and let's talk about Costpoint 6, because that's probably where most, 99% of us are going to be coming from. Costpoint 6, because we're going to use this to compare, 6 to 7 and the differences in particular. So with Costpoint 6, the basic architecture is a client-server environment, where we're on a PC or a workstation, generally within a terminal services environment, or actually sitting at your location, at your office. You actually loaded the software on that PC. The IT department might have come and run the setup. But the software ran there, and the database existed somewhere else. Maybe it was in the closet down the hall from you. Maybe it was also in a data center, maybe remotely connected. But in any case, that was the basic setup for Costpoint 6. And some of you who wanted remote access to that would use some more sophisticated folks would use a Citrix NAP environment. Others would use a terminal server, maybe over a VPN connection or something like that. So that's the basics for Costpoint 6. Costpoint 7 is a completely different technology. Deltek has done away with the client, and the client is now exists within a web tier, a WebLogic server, to be more specific. If you're familiar with time and expense, this is the architecture of time and expense. This architecture is very much like the time and expense architecture, only a little more steroidal. You know, certainly a bigger environment. So now the user interface is not one that has to be installed. The client side doesn't have to be installed on a PC or laptop or on a terminal server, but instead you just open up a browser and you URL directly to the web tier, the web application tier. There's certainly more detail on the slide about which environments are supported. Browser support has come a long way from the original, which was just earlier versions of IE. Now this new version 7.01 is supporting Chrome and Firefox, Safari, and IE 10. You'll just to preempt one of the questions, which will ask, what about IE 11? And I understand a service or a hotfix is coming to support 11, but it's currently not officially supported yet. So anyway, detour. On the web tier, it's the WebLogic server from Oracle, like we were talking about, or IIS. Either one of those. You're likely going to use IIS if you're going to do SSL encryption and have this available on the internet, but we'll cover that here in a minute too. The application tier is where a good bit of the work is done, as well as in the database. So when looking at Costpoint 7's database compared to Costpoint 6 from a technologist's point of view, when you're looking at the two of those, the 7 database looks very much like the 6. They didn't do a whole lot of structural change. As a matter of fact, almost no structural change to the database. Just the things they had to do to affect some of the new functionality that was going in. But for the most part, if you had things written against the 6 database, then most of those things will run fairly well, especially queries, data extracts against the database for 7. And this more recent version of Costpoint 7.0.1 is now also supporting the 2012 server and SQL server environments. So that's the contrast. Let's break this down a little bit into its components, though, and we'll spend a little bit of time on this slide and the next one. But again, in this gray box here in the middle, we've got our PC laptop with the browser running Costpoint 7. It's connected to, in this sample, I've used a load-balanced pair of IIS servers. You don't have to have two, but if you want higher availability, it's a good idea to have 2 servers out there and a load balancer in front that uses sticky load balancing so that you can get to the same server each time. They then connect back to WebLogic on the application server side, and we've certainly learned a lot in the last couple of years building larger groups of these servers. And I have this in one of the bullet points later as well. But this cluster, this Costpoint 7 WebLogic cluster, and Costpoint in particular, seems to work better when there are 2 or 4 servers in the cluster. But in order to increase performance, that we wouldn't necessarily add more servers, we would add more capacity to the servers. So if you need more CPU, you'd bump the CPU on those servers, or if you need more memory, you'd bump the memory on those servers instead. But anyway, that's also a point on a later slide. Moving around the diagram here, we've got the job server, which used to be called the process server on the Costpoint 6 side. Process server was a little bit clunky. It was a little bit hard to use because it had to be loaded on a workstation, and that workstation had to be turned on, and it had to be connected. And those in order to schedule those things, you had to go to that workstation to do that. The job server is very different in Costpoint 7. Here you're able to, and a lot of the functionality works where it's actually submitting jobs against the job server. And the reason they're labeled here as optional is that you don't actually need separate servers for the job server. You can have your WebLogic application tier do double duty, serve both your job server traffic as well as your end user traffic. So there's no need to break them out separately. But if you've got performance issues, if the job server is creating performance issues for your end user, breaking them out certainly is an option. The other thing that's different here is that Costpoint 7, the Costpoint 6, I'm sorry, the process server was optional. You didn't really have to use it. In 7, it's not optional because a lot of the multi-threaded, a lot of the locking algorithms that Zeltek's using in 7 to get around some of the lock issues of the past. The reason those are gone now is because they're threading those jobs through the job server. So so you're not going to have to call around and say, okay, everybody get out of AP because I need to post, or get out of this module or that module. The application is now much better structured for that. You submit your, unknowingly, you're submitting your jobs against the job server, and the job server is running those either in series, or it's running in a way in which it has all the locks it needs. So it does multiple things at one time. Just you can't post two jobs to AP at the same time. But if you're sitting next to each other and you both hit submit, and it comes back, one comes back in a second, and the other comes back in a second and a half, could you really tell that you didn't actually run that job? So anyway, the admin server is necessary because you're going to be creating a cluster. If you want higher availability, you'll want that server. If you're just going to create a single node application server in Costpoint, then the admin server is optional, or it's not actually required at all. The next box is interesting because it really shows a test server with all the components on it. And the admin that functionality really isn't completely necessary. But that box there, you can put all of these things on a single box, and that especially works well for your test environment, whether that or development environment or user acceptance testing, whichever. As long as you're not trying to do performance testing, all those components can live together. They don't have to be individual servers. I also have shown, running down the left page here, a separate WebLogic server integration WebLogic server. When doing integrations, which is one of those new features in Costpoint 7, in particular web services integrations, for production, you'll really want that to be a separate virtual machine, a separate WebLogic server if you can help it, if you can afford it. The logic there is whenever you deploy a web service, not running it, but if you make a change to it and you try to deploy it, and if you've put that into your cluster with your app servers, every time you need to deploy that web service, it's going to basically kick off all your users and reboot the cluster, basically. So so just as a best practice, because you never know when one of those things might have to be changed. You don't have to then wait for an evening or whatever. If that's okay with you and that's not an issue, then hey, go for it. Put it up in your application server. But there's another reason to keep this separate here on the next slide. But lastly, on this slide is the right and the database, of course, down there on the lower left. We've mirrored that over to a disaster recovery site, which then has at least one Costpoint server on the other side containing all the apps, or it could be a mirror of production. So this is the basic layout of how you might structure a Costpoint implementation. Obviously very different than what you would see in a Costpoint 6. And if it wasn't clear, each of the blue boxes was a virtual machine or an image, just to kind of show that in that arrangement there. So we go to the next page. It's rather busy, but it helps a bit because we went through that first page first, and I won't spend a lot of time on this page, I promise. But just to highlight some things here, we're still going to start with the PC. All the apps now are browser-based for the most part. There are very few exceptions, things that aren't browser-based. So we've got Costpoint, we've got time and expense we're showing, CER, which is the new name for Cognos 10, Cognos Enterprise Reporting, what Deltek's calling it. TM1, which is the budget and planning application, also from Cognos, and Costpoint Analytics. So all of those are browser-based apps. They run on your PC. There's not going to be any more of that client-server type arrangement needed. But But now, so now we've added the whole picture of all the apps. You can see there's a set of complications here. And in the vertical bars, I've added kind of like network division, network boundaries, right? So maybe the third column here where it's the office network, I've got that PC. It's connecting over to my IIS, which sits in a DMZ, the Costpoint 7 load balance IIS, and then into the next column there that connects over to the WebLogic app server. This is all the stuff we covered on the previous screen, and it flows through where that's my protected network, the one that's labeled data center in the top left. So that's the one that's protected. The most protected, the DMZ, is your buffer between you and the internet. Likewise, if we go back to time and expense 9.0, we've got an IIS server with the new touch time server. So we're able to do, if you're on 9.01 and it comes now with the license, you're able to do your timesheet on your mobile device. Unfortunately, not yet BlackBerry. This platform doesn't support that, but yes on the Android and the iPhone, and they still have the old platform for the BlackBerry, but that's changing as well. Similar infrastructure that you're familiar with today on the T&E, not a big change there. On the CER, the Cognos side, similar infrastructure when you're upgrading from 8 to 10. No big changes there. The Cognos gateway, though, becomes your front end for the Cognos TM1 server. So you get a unified view of that. So it's really only one website to hit to either do your BI reporting or to do a lot of your work for budget and planning stuff. Just to kind of round things out, we've got an analytics server that we've added into the mix here. Your Deltek connector, which is really pervasive. Deltek's labeled and sold it as Deltek connector. That server and the WebLogic integration server I was talking about earlier, you really could run those on the same virtual machine. We do that for our clients when we host that, because if I'm doing pervasive work, if I'm doing a web services change and I'm going to deploy it, likely that I'm doing this in a time where I don't have a scheduled job, so I can control then when this WebLogic server reboots, and then I don't have to affect my end users. And just if you carry the WebLogic line server across, we get the web services application. So any app that talks web services, and there are more and more of them these days. It's not unusual to have some interesting applications that actually talk the talk in web services. If you don't know what web services is, think about it as a gateway into the database, or the back door into the database. But Costpoint, all the business logic around Costpoint is protecting you. So in the old days, you might go and write an SQL query against the database, and you get back some data, but I forgot to link this table, and I forgot to consider this flag or that flag, so this is inactive or that's not active, and oh my gosh, it's a complete mess. I can't really trust the data I get back with a query that I write myself. But through a WebLogic interface, if I send a query, a WebLogic query, a web services query through the WebLogic integration server, all the business logic that the screens use is built into that server as well. So if I'm doing queries, that data is structured the way you would see it on a report that's coming out of Costpoint. If I'm injecting a transaction through the integration service, all the business logic is checking for all the things the screen would have checked for, and I can't get bad data in through that interface. Unlike many other interfaces, certainly that not only have we written, everyone's written from time to time, where we've actually tried to insert or update the rows actually in the table, in the Costpoint tables. So this generation of Costpoint gives us this really powerful feature here with this integration server. So if you're not excited about it, I certainly am. So you should be too. But some of the rest of the other infrastructure showing here. So we can still obviously process files through Pervasive, the ETL tool. So we've got the data feed interfaces that come secure FTP over through the file server, and then Pervasive can pick up those files and process them, and maybe he turns them into web service calls, or maybe there's still some other, SSIS package or some other thing that's running that does some of that processing. So all that stuff is still possible Oh, and the other thing that's interesting on the web services side is the preprocessors that we all use today. You know, the employee master file preprocessor, journal entry preprocessor, all these things. Well, because those are screens, those formats are actually available on the web services side as well. So if you want to take a baby step, you know, into web services, you could actually make a web services call that ingests your already formatted preprocessor data, and kind of, you know, oh, I get it. This is how it all works, and not have to redevelop, ask somebody on the other end to necessarily redevelop their interface, because you're able to accept that data in that format. So anyway, like I said, cool stuff. And we'll get the rest of the infrastructure over here. The last thing added to this drawing on the right-hand side is a full set of disaster recovery, everything, right? So I just don't need a single server. I've got all these applications who actually need DR at some level or some point, whether it's cold or hot or just backups, or some service from somebody who might provide you know, disaster recovery services. So don't forget the DR side of the house as well. So on the next next slide here, we're talking a little bit about the evolution, and I think I've referred to some of this stuff already, so I kind of can't help it. I'm excited. I give it away. But so even though Costpoint 7 is still relatively new, it's only been out a couple and a half, 3 years now. It's gone through two public iterations and a couple before. This going from 7.0 to 7.01. We used to have the Actuate server. That's the same Actuate reporting server that we use over in the time and expense side. That Actuate server actually required a separate, it didn't have to have a separate server, but it actually performed a lot better, Costpoint in general, if you had a separate or set of, or even a pseudo cluster of Actuate servers. Now, in the 7.01 release, Actuate's gone, and the servers that were required with it on the 7.0 side are gone as well. And that's been replaced by BERT, which is a related tool, but a publicly available tool that's packaged with Costpoint. You don't have to go get it. The Costpoint installer goes and installs BERT. But it's also on that same application server that we had in the previous slides we were talking about. It co-lives with the app server. The additional support for browsers, when 7.0 came out, it was just IE8. So now we've got 9 and 10. 11 coming with a hotfix at some point here soon, and Chrome, which was big news, because certainly Chrome has gotten pretty popular in the last year, and then Safari and Firefox as well. This release supports Windows Server 2012 as well as SQL Server 2012. So if you'd like to be on the bleeding edge of those technologies, we're technically a year and a little bit, almost 2 years of those things being generally available. Personally, we're still running those in the test environment. We haven't put a production workload on either of those yet, but I think that's a this year kind of goal. The things have definitely stabilized, and we haven't found recently haven't found any new issues with the 2012 support, either OS or SQL Server. And the big news for those who really want it. I'm not a fan, but we had LDAP support where you could use the same login and password as your Active Directory. That's great for Costpoint. But now the 7.01 release supports the actual single sign-on through a SAML token. So once you've logged into your workstation and you hit the URL, the website for Costpoint, if you've already authenticated into your workstation, it takes you right into the app without a login and a password. So good and bad about that. I trust all of my end users. I'm sure you do too, but so many of them don't lock their screens. And being able to walk up to the payroll clerk's desk and find out what Joe makes because I just literally clicked on the link, it kind of defeats that extra layer of testing of security. Most of us are going in the opposite direction. We're adding a layer, not taking away layers. Now, time and expense is a completely different story. When time and expense really supports the SAML token for SSO, getting your timesheet done, and the data's not quite as sensitive, I'm all for that. But here in Costpoint, I think it's something everyone needs to really think about your own situation, whether you really want to do it or not. Cluster the WebLogic servers for higher availability, and use either a pair or 4. And the reason for the even number is because they pair themselves up as a primary, secondary. So every user that comes in that connects to WebLogic server, their state is being shared with one other server. So if you lose one of the 3, then there's one server for that to go to. Having 3 servers doesn't really balance that out very well. So so either have 2 or 4 servers, and then if you need more capacity, if you need more horsepower, then make your virtual machines larger or make your physical machines larger, either from a processing point of view or a memory point of view. Separate the job servers. I think we talked about that earlier. If you've got performance issues, otherwise, let WebLogic do the work and balance that stuff out. If you have the job servers in your application pool, application servers, then the job server workload will spread out among the number of machines you have in that environment as well. And then we've also talked about the separate integration server, how it fits really nice with the pervasive. If you've got Deltek Connector and you're going to be doing that kind of work, the ETL work, then please consider putting those together. It kind of makes sense. It'll save you a whole virtual machine. So Brian alluded to this early in his part introduction here. We've got a serious technology change here for this application, and it's not come in on a Friday, run the upgrade, and then they're up on Monday morning. This is not IT's upgrade. This is a fairly serious business process change. It's also one that needs a good bit of testing. So Deltek last year published a list of areas that they recommended that you spend time testing. In particular, they almost completely rewrote the payroll module. So if you do payroll there's a couple of messages about people who do payroll in Costpoint. One is, after April 30 this year, you're not going to get your tax table updates. If you were doing them by hand anyway, then maybe that's not as a big deal. But that's one of the things they're not going to publish after April. But anyway, yeah, if you're doing payroll in Costpoint, that's #1 thing to test and make sure. There are a lot of unique ways that people can run payroll, and we haven't found them all yet. There's still occasional defects being found in the payroll module for unique things that folks are doing. I'm not going to read through the whole list just to save you, but you can see the check processing, the Nicker font. If you do that, if you do print your own check stock with the magnetic cartridge, do test that before you go live. Getting those fonts loaded exactly right on your workstation it's not tricky. It just has to be. And I'd hate to see you get to either payday or AP day and not be able to print those things. So that's important. The concept of alternate file locations, you'll have absolutely no idea what that means unless you've been in Costpoint 7 already. But the alternate file location is a mechanism Deltek uses for getting files in and out of Costpoint. You can spend your whole life in Costpoint and never have to use it unless you're doing imports and exports between time and expense in Costpoint. But it can be very powerful also by being able to use them for shared folder access and some other things. So anyway, make sure your users understand what those are and how they're used, and test them. Make sure they work. The whole security apparatus here is going to change, and there's a bunch of slides on that here in a minute. And not just web integrations, but integrations in general. Obviously, when we're changing this new release, it has different capabilities. It has mostly the same stuff that Costpoint 6 did because the database was the same. So if we're doing integration work, through batch jobs that hit the back end of the database, you're likely okay. But please do test those as well. And here's another slide from Deltek, just underscoring the make your plan. This is not a few day or a few week upgrade. So there's planning, testing involved. There'll be training for both not only the people who use the system, the end user, the accountants and all that stuff, but the people who get reporting, and now there's a whole lot of things that you can expose to people that you didn't necessarily have before. So if you're gonna now you have the ability to open up purchase orders to everyone, or purchase requisitions. Sorry, it's a nice web-based application. It's easy to go in, do your purchase rec, and be able to spread that work out among the folks in the field. So now you've got a dozen more people, or you've got 10%, you got 100% more users than you had before possibly. And the reason they didn't ever do it before was because I didn't want to go out there and load that stupid binary. I didn't have to install Costpoint on their workstation for them to do a purchase rec. Now they can be anywhere in the world with their PC or the laptop as long as they can hit that URL. And I can say, hey, I need 13 widgets. I submit my requisition. The purchasing department gets hold of it, and away you go. So anyway, decentralized requisition request is probably the #1 thing that's going to drive extra uptick, and now all the reporting function, improved reporting functions. But anyway, that's all a tangent. The real message here is make sure you plan and train the people not only that use it today, but the people who will use it once you go live. If you haven't started your planning, do it now would be good. But you certainly do it at some point. And Deltek recommends that you hire them or someone, one of the consulting partners, to help. So you can go through the documentation and do it all yourself. If you get nothing out of the discussion today, I just saw this thing this morning on the news about all the potholes that were created from the storms that we've had here this winter. There are certainly potholes and pre-filled potholes that the partners now know about, and because we've done many of these. So if you don't have to, but we certainly recommend, and Deltek does too, get some help with this process if you're able. Not just from the hardware the hardware point of view, because that's 32-bit hardware that you're running on today. This system will not support. So I don't know if you noticed, but the 2008 R2 is the minimum on the Microsoft side of things. That's a 64-bit operating system. Can't run at 32. So if you've got older servers in your server farm running Costpoint 6 at this point, there's none of those are going to be able to be used. You're going to have to replace them. So anyway, we'll go to the next one. This is a little hard to read in the middle there with the yellow, but so apologies on that. But here's the basic outline of how an upgrade might be structured. Just like I was implying, see if our infrastructure is ready, see if it's good to go. Are there things we need to do or change? Go through security is a big functional change. Functionally, yeah, security has changed quite a bit in this product. A lot of folks are starting over with that, and there's a couple of slides on that here coming up in a second. Test training, do some more testing, resolve some issues, because you're going to find a defect. Every client that we've upgraded to this point has found at least one, and Deltek's been really awesome about recognizing these are upgrade-related defects and then getting them into their process and getting them out. So. So go through that cycle. Make sure you find the things that that are critical to your processing. Make sure you really test those. Find what issues there are. Get them to Deltek, to your partner, that can then get them to Deltek and get them fixed. And then of course the recommendation is a weekend to cut over, not just not a day, in the middle of the weekday. Although we've had a few clients who've done weekday cutovers, but they really spent a long time testing, and we're prepared for that. So, so we've covered some of this already. So the implications of this thing now being a web-based application. So from a CIO's point of view, or from IT's point of view, CIO point of view, CTO point of view, I don't have to deploy that thing out there to the workstations anymore. I've got browser support, and I have browser support across many kinds of browsers. I don't have to run a terminal server anymore for people to get remote access. If I choose to put Costpoint on the web, which that's the next to last bullet on there. It's like you do have to make that choice. Do I want to have people run it over a VPN or not? Do I trust? How much do I trust my own security, my own firewall protection, all the things that you do to secure your environment? If I'm going to run this thing in my data center, or out of the closet down the hall next to accounting, will I make this internet accessible? Can I really lock it down to feel good about that? We also mentioned, third bullet down, you're going to have more people that are outside the office, with the purchase requisition capabilities and lots of other things, reporting. Ultimately, they might decide, your user's going to decide for you, yeah, this is going to need to be publicly accessible in some way, VPN or not. So we've got a new way to add users into Costpoint. The old way was hard, right? Especially from an IT point of view. You had to go and add the user to the database, which was completely. The clients couldn't be self-service, even if they were in Active Directory. I still had to go add them to the database. So the good news about 7 is that no longer necessary. The steps are really easy now. Once the person's in Active Directory, which just is part of their onboarding, right? They get put in there. You add a URL into their favorites or a shortcut on their desktop that goes to the URL for Costpoint or some kind of portal page, however it is that you have that set up for them to go. Accounting gets that person in either through our employee master feed or is inputting them. They associate them with the Active Directory user ID, assign them a security role, and boom, they're into Costpoint 7. So lots quicker, a lot nicer. The security is role-based though. So so if you're a SOX compliant shop and you've gone to the trouble of getting all your Costpoint 6 SOX compliance in, I'm saying SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, then I feel for you. That was a lot of hard work. Costpoint 7 actually makes it a lot easier because there's now roles that line up so that you can do the separation of duties. Most folks are scrapping their current security model and starting over. The overrides, there are no overrides in 7. So, but if you used extensive use of overrides in 6, that will definitely, push you towards wanting to recreate your security models. And it comes with a canned set of things that are nice and work for a lot of people, unless you've got a rather complicated structure. That the roles, at least those user groups, are things you'll be able to use just right out of the box. Already mentioned it was roles-based. If you want to get to SOX compliance and you're not, this is an opportunity actually. So here's where you might want to think about changing your business processes along with the upgrade. So from a CIO's point of view, and if your company's looking to go public, or they are public, and even doubly more important to be Sarbanes-Oxley compliant. I know I'm being repetitive here, but there will be a lot more people in Costpoint with this web-based application. So we need to think about that, who those people will be. A lot of self-service stuff now that they can go in and do, and the Cognos tools also. Now, if you were impromptu before, you're going to be going to Cognos 8 or 10. Hopefully, you'll go from impromptu to 10, since there's no reason to stop at 8. And a lot of these, project managers and stuff, they can be, or program managers, they can all be self-service. They don't necessarily need to come to the accounting department to get their PSRs published every few days or every week or every month or every half month, whatever it turns out to be. So you're going to have a lot more users. This was a really great session that we did, I think it was late last year, on mastering user security, webinar we did. It's out on our blog, which I think Brian's going to show you the URL to here at the end of the presentation. And there's also a YouTube recording of that out there, so you can actually listen to that webinar. If you read the instructions, it says you can upgrade the security. You can, but it will not result in what you think it will result in. So you want to definitely consider whether that's going to work for you. You can actually see what it does, but creating it from scratch has been most folks. Look at the new functionality that's in Costpoint. Consider whether you want to deploy that along with the deployment, or maybe schedule it to do sometime later. And I've got a slide on extensibility here in a second. And the last bullet is kind of nice. We figured out that we can take all the security settings out of your test environment. So if you're doing all your testing and you've refined your policy and you've got all this really great stuff in your test environment, when you come to production weekend, you got to do it all over, because you got to start and reconvert that whole database again. So we figured out how to programmatically clone the security settings out of your test environment and apply them to your production on the cutover weekend. So I would certainly recommend doing that. I've certainly seen people key them in by hand and have the simplistic model. It works okay. But if you've got any kind of complexity in your security model, consider doing that. This extensibility is a new feature in Costpoint that lets you change screens, add fields, even add modules. If you wanted to write or create an entire module, you can certainly do that. If you're not considering extensibility during your initial conversion because it works the way you want, again, you can delay that till later. If there's always that, I wanted to make this thing much more efficient for an AP clerk to enter an AP voucher, or I have a clerk who only does non-labor vouchers, and I don't need all that labor stuff on the screen cluttering things around. Or I want to create a requisition screen that has 3 fields on it, and that's all I need. This module can do those things. But it's not really a module. This feature can do those things. So both Deltek's consulting arm and a number of the partners can help with this extensibility option. Integration, I spent already probably too much time talking about integration because I am pretty passionate about all the possibilities. Every field you can see on a screen is exposed through web services, so the preprocessors are also. And and you can even do more with it if you go with the Deltek connector, the pervasive ETL, and really do some powerful things. Seamless real-time integrations with Costpoint and interfacing systems. Rather exciting. So I guess we're going to spend a minute here and do a quick poll. I have a couple more slides after that, but I was wanting to ask you if you're considering hosting Costpoint 7 in the cloud. Certainly lots and lots of buzz about the cloud and what the cloud can do. So we wanted to just take a little sample here. Some of these are interesting. So no, I'm going to host in-house. I'm going to stay with my current hosting provider. I'm thinking about moving to another hosting provider. Amazon Web Services, Azure, interesting solutions there. We've been building some AWS cloud, dedicated clouds for some folks, and those have been interesting solutions. Now Deltek offers Costpoint SaaS. They just announced that recently. It's not actually technically announced, but it is generally available now. So maybe you're considering not even worrying about this at all, and going to Costpoint in the cloud with Deltek's cloud. So we're getting fairly far through the votes here.
Should we give them a few more seconds to get their votes in, Rob?
Sure.
Okay, 3 seconds. Put pressure on people. 2, 1. Yeah, you see, I tell them 2 seconds, and all of a sudden a few more votes come in. All right, let's close the poll in and show the results.
So interesting. So we get a lot of folks are going to do this in-house. So you're in the right place. I hope we've conveyed a lot of good information for people in this webinar. I have a summary of some of the points here at the end as well. If you're going to do this in-house, please consider these things. Get some help if you need it. Glad to do that. We do a good bit of that, but some of the other partners do as well. So glad to hear if any of the 18% are hosted in my hosting environment that you're staying. That's good too. So back to the presentation. Thank you for that information, guys. Really appreciate that. Remote access to publish or not to publish it on the internet. With the user base expanding, ultimately, yeah, probably will have to, unless you have a pervasive use of the VPN in your company. So here's some tips here. If you use SSL certificates, obviously you will use an SSL certificate if you put it on the internet. The wildcards are great, but you need to make sure you front it with IIS. The wildcards don't work when you use WebLogic as the front. So use IIS as the front for your wildcard certs if you're going to use that. And then of course, standard security model. Put your IIS in a DMZ in case somebody does break in there. They aren't going to be able to get to the back network, so certainly not easy. And then consider external testing. Deltek does some of that against their application to make sure that it can't be intrusioned, but it's in your environment. You've got a different set of firewall holes open. You've got different environments. So consider doing your own scans to make sure that you're secure. I mentioned a little bit about time and expense 9 before, and the touch time application, which folks are liking. It has a little bit of a limit functionality-wise, but they're right now you can't do approvals. But everyone can enter their time, so no one has an excuse for missing their floor check, right, Brian?
I never miss my.
You never fail the floor check.
Except yesterday.
Okay, and then just like Costpoint, it also has been replaced by Actuate. So here's a summary. CIO, the CTOs in the office are the folks who are concerned about IT in general. Your user mix is going to change, and it's going to expand. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You're going to get a lot more data to a lot more people, but you're going to have to train a lot more people. End users will be more productive after the short learning curve. Number one and number 2, awesome things in Costpoint 7. I can resize the screens. Yay! And every report can go to Excel.
Yay!
Yay! So this is hard when it's not an interactive audience, but folks who don't know that, it's like these are 2 big pain points, and Costpoint 7 solves that or addresses that. Web services, better, greater integrations, real time with business logic, that checks your transactions. If your current infrastructure is old or you don't have a disaster recovery plan, might be time to consider hosting. That was a little plug. And Costpoint 7 is new. It does have defects. Everyone's Costpoint configuration is different, and there's no way they could have tested every one of them. You will find something wrong when you go through your testing. Most likely, we haven't seen one yet that hasn't. So in the schedule, allow time for troubleshooting those things and installing fixes. If you run payroll, this is another business question, really. And if you run payroll in Costpoint, have you considered outsourcing payroll? Tying Costpoint to this April deadline, or having to manually do your updates to the tax tables, that might give you that extra cushion you need to say, hey, now I'm not in such a rush to get this Costpoint upgrade done. I'll push it out into October. I'll push it into 1/1 or something. Look, don't do 1/1. There's enough things happen on the annual boundaries. But anyway, and then the security changes we talked a good bit about as well. This is an opportunity to look at your business process, how you do things, and optimize them. We've partnered with a good number of CPA firms and other business process experts, and have had some really great success with a joint effort between our firm doing the upgrade and the business process optimization folks from those other firms to come in and look at how you're doing things, and give you some real concrete suggestions on how we can how you might be able to not only better utilize the system, but get more productivity out of your workforce and out of the system itself. Don't forget to upgrade your disaster recovery site. You've got 3 upgrades to do. You got Costpoint 6 to 7. You got time and expense, probably 8 dot something to 901, and you've got Cognos. Hopefully, you aren't running Impromptu, but if you are, you need to get that up to at least 8, but definitely to Cognos 10. Impromptu is no longer supported to access Costpoint 7. Consider doing those things before. There's no reason not to. All the stuff is backwardly compatible, and then you can conquer your Costpoint 7. I think I mentioned this: train, test, and train. That's what it's going to take to be successful. Back to Brian.
Thank you, Rob. Well, Rob was taking us through the good look at Costpoint. He talked a little bit about the potholes and that you're going to want to avoid. I drive this one route every day, and I know where the potholes are. They're easy to avoid once you know where they are, but first time you're on the road, they will take you by surprise. We also talked about this deadline, and we want to emphasize, if you get past April, if you're on Costpoint 6 and you go into sustaining support, you're looking at, you won't get the regulatory updates. So if you're running payroll, that could be a challenge for you. You just need to be aware of it. But also you're running a little risk there with the Severity 1 issues. There won't be any hot fixes for those as well. But we also want to share with you some of the resources that we at NeoSystems provide to you. We've mentioned the blog, and we also have another webinar coming up, the CFO's Guide to Upgrading for Costpoint 7, which will be on March 13th. Just like last year, we did the CIO's Guide and CFO's Guide. Again, we're repeating those. A lot of you are past your year-end close, and you've got some things, and now you're turning to doing the upgrade. And we also have lots of training classes available. And one of the things we found is that for existing users, it's where is everything? Things have changed. This is hard. On the good news side, for new users to Costpoint, with Costpoint 7, the learning curve is much faster. They're coming up to speed. So a lot of benefits there. Diving into this just a little, I want to highlight the Costpoint 7 Center in our blog. We talked about the potholes. We've talked about the deadlines. But Rob also mentioned some of the benefits of going to Costpoint 7, and it's incredible. The little things like there's project templates now, and there's tables versus forms, so adding data can be so much faster. We have extensibility now, and some of the things we've been able to do with it for our clients, it saves them so much time and really leverages Costpoint and allows them to extend Costpoint with extensibility to the whole enterprise. We talk about a lot of these things in our blog. What can you do with Costpoint 7 now that you're there? So I really hope you take the time to check out our blog and see some of the benefits of once you upgrade to Costpoint 7. I mentioned the training, excuse me, I mentioned the training classes. Very valuable, and I just encourage you, if you train your users and then use your users to do the testing, you'll get a great deal of benefit. But critical to that is training them on the changes and introducing them to Costpoint 7. Then they'll know, is it me or is it Costpoint 7? I don't know which way the problem is. By giving them this training, their testing will be much, much more effective. With that, I want to open it up to your questions. Please feel free to enter your questions into the questions box. We always get one question about, will we be making the slides available? We're going to make the recording available to you probably early next week, so be looking for that email coming to you. Other questions, Rob? You want to take one of these?
Yeah. So there's a couple that have come in, and I know we're here at the end, so that just so folks know, we'll take whatever questions we get, and we'll compose a blog post for them, and we'll make sure we post all the answers to the questions out on the blog as well. So that we'll start with that, and I'll just keep going here for a few minutes, and we'll run a minute or two over. Am I allowed? Okay, I'm allowed. So the first question was, do you have to load Excel on the server? Is that required for Costpoint 7? And to get things into Excel, you'll need Excel loaded on the workstation with the browser. If you just want to do view only, you can do the view only browser for your Excel, but no, there's no Excel required server side anymore. Yeah, you don't need Excel on the server. Job server, non-dedicated, is it sufficient to handle the MRP full regen process? We've got folks with non-dedicated job servers who are running that just fine. The volume of data is probably the biggest variable there. So we would certainly want to explore that in testing and see if dedicated job server would be necessary. If it is, then I wouldn't deploy one. I'd deploy a pair, because while one job server is busy and other jobs come in, you don't want it to necessarily back up. So I would do a pair of job servers if it turns out you do need them. Do the current preprocessor sources need to be redeveloped, modified to work with Costpoint 7? No. Can you speak to the new collation issue? The answer is yes. You're going to have to rewrite some queries and some reports to handle the collation change. Yeah.
Okay, Rob, if I see a question here. If Costpoint is being hosted by NeoSystems. Will we still need servers, or is that done by NeoSystems?
Yeah. So if you are hosted with us, then we'll create the infrastructure for you. You won't need any servers on site. All you really need is your browser, and you'll connect to the server in our cloud. So we'll create that infrastructure for you. Yeah. No capital purchase on that side. Do you have hardware scale? Do you have a hardware scaling document? Well,
yeah,
we have experience. Well, we have just some base experience about it at this point. So we have a variety of different size clients with different size databases, and the number of users appears to be more of a driver. The number of end user, simultaneous concurrent users, and how many screens you open in Costpoint. So if you're not using materials module, or you're not using this module, that module, the ratio of how much of a server can support you, it's an interesting combination. So a document is going to be hard to produce, I think ever, just because there's so many variables. But I'm certainly glad to spend time talking about what your environment looks like, what your stats are, and try to give you like a base. Say, hey, I would start with this base and see where it goes. I haven't seen a scaling document out of Deltek. I would be surprised because there's too many variables. Yes, the collation issue is a MS SQL problem, not an Oracle issue. The formats, yes, just to confirm, the formats do not change on the preprocessors when you move from 6 to 7. Those remain the same. There are no formatting changes.
Yeah, and there's a question here about how many people have moved to Costpoint 7. And we've been doing this now we've been upgrading companies, gosh, it's over a year and a half. First we upgraded ourselves and for our internal clients, and then so it's been about coming up on 2 years that we've been upgrading clients to Costpoint 7 and that now 7.0. And what percentage we can speak to, but we can speak to the value that they're receiving now that they've made that move, and all the benefits that are accruing. Some companies are started with the extensibility, integrating with their other applications and getting value there. So a good number of...
So Brian, what was that, when you were at the partner meeting a couple weeks ago, Deltek threw out a number of, like, was it 250?
About 250 companies they said had completed, and then another, and that's what I'm trying to remember the number that they...
It was like 800 or 900 had downloaded out of the 1,500 companies that are in Costpoint.
So a good majority of companies have completed their upgrade or in the process of upgrading.
Yeah. And
so that's an area where we're glad to see companies moving to Costpoint 7. I want to thank everybody for their time today. We ran a little bit over, and I apologize for that, but there were so many good questions. We will work on getting the rest of these questions followed up in blog posts or directly. So hopefully for you, if you're looking to upgrade to Costpoint 7 and you're concerned about those IT issues and the CIO's perspective, we were able to give that to you today. We've done this. We're in the process of doing or completed over 50 upgrades to Costpoint 7. So we've driven this road. We've seen the potholes. And we also see the benefits that you can achieve by upgrading to Costpoint 7. So if you have any more questions for us, please feel free to shoot Rob and me an email. We'd be happy to follow up with you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.